Hi, this is Jason Rigby, the Albuquerque Business Podcast, and I have a returning guest. So, are you any relation with the seasoning salt? Is it is it Lowry or what's? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. I see it at the supermarket.
Yeah, I don't think I have any relation to that, the salt or the jerky, because I think there's a jerky out there.
Yeah, I think there is too. Yeah,
neither one.
And then you kind of have like one of those cool names because it's like it's Riley Lowry, right?
Yeah, that's right, Riley Lowry. And actually, I meet a lot more nieces and aunts by the name of Riley. Not as many uncles and nephews for sure. Actually, a funny story about that. I was just in Vegas. There was 3 generations of male Rileys in one room at one time. It was the crazy. I've never seen that before in my life. It was crazy.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah. So you have to get like a Riley picture.
Yeah, we should have done that.
I always think of like back east. That's a pretty popular name. Like I think like in Chicago and area stuff like that. There's a lot of Rileys. Yeah, but it's a mostly a male name, right?
Well, depending.
Do you see mostly females?
I run into a lot more females.
Really?
It depends on the spelling. Because I'm Riley. I guess it would be Ryelee. I see that a lot.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. That seems like that'd be a difference. So you're a consultant, trainer, and we encouraged everybody. We did a lot of the last podcast we had with you. Is really cool. We went into sales training, into sales management and all that. Mm-hmm. But I kind of want to start off because you're on the road a lot.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like a road warrior. And I want to kind of go through, because you were telling me earlier about your routine.
Yeah.
I think it would help a lot of people that travel. I think they'd be kind of cool in what you do. So do you start the night before you're going to the airport, or how does it go?
Well, it depends on when the either the flight or the drive out. So maybe we'll address it 2 ways. We'll talk about flying out first, and then maybe like driving, right? Because I approach them 2 different ways.
Right.
So if the flight's late enough in the afternoon or mid morning, I'll just pack the same day, which I know that's probably not the best, but. Right. So I actually keep 2 sets of everything at home versus on the road. What I mean by that is, 2 sets of like chargers at home for my laptop, for all my devices, everything just stays put. And then actually, you can see it across the room. In my backpack, I keep pretty much everything necessary to survive as far as electronics go. But once I get packed and ready to go, I usually try to show up to the airport. I'm like that guy that's like 55 minutes before my flight, running through the airport, getting through security. Hopefully I can pass through a TSA pre-check or clear in the near future to get that done.
Right.
And then, for me, I usually fly for the most part, one airline, just because, I try to just stay loyal to it, just because you get a lot more benefits from that perspective, as well as just sit in the same seat. Because, I guess my philosophy with flying would be the equivalency of showing up to like your 9 to 5, your office job. Most folks that go into an office that work a 9 to 5, they'll come in at 8:55 or whatever time they get there. They'll do their pleasantries with all their coworkers. They'll say hello, because that's just a part of their routine. Right. So part of my routine is to try to eliminate as much thinking as possible before I get to my end destination. So that's why I sit in the same seat, relatively speaking, or same area of the airplane, as long as it's accessible. And then by the time I get off, I kind of go through the same thing. I always schedule my meetings to where I can go pick up a rental car first, and get to my meeting or destination in a timely manner. However, I do have kind of a quirky thing when it comes to hotels, right? Every time I check into a hotel, I set it up the exact same way.
Meaning, this is cool though.
Yeah, meaning like, even the way that I set up, my toiletries in the bathroom. Like I have it all set up the same way to where I don't even have to think in the morning. Like my toothbrush is in the same place, and everything in which that I need is all in the exact same spot. I wear a lot of hair product. That and my
amazing hair. Yeah.
That and my comb is in the exact same spot. So I keep all that stuff there just so I don't have to think about things. Because ultimately you got to turn that hotel room into a room.
Right.
That's not just a room, but it's more your home.
Right.
So I even lay out my outfits for, if I stay in a hotel for multiple nights, I'll lay out my outfits, for multiple nights in a specific order. So that so all I have to do is wake up, grab it.
So you're not thinking like the 20, 30 minutes before you check out. You're running around checking everything to make sure.
Yeah. And actually I even go as far to, I travel with a power strip for all my electronic devices.
You know how many times I've needed one of those?
A million, right?
Yeah.
So I got to that point to where I have a retractable cord on mine to where it's nice and concise. And all my plugs on that are in the exact same spot. So when I do my, if you will, like as you're mentioning, like the checkout piece of it,
right?
If I don't have to run through a checklist because it's all there. Like if visually speaking, I run over there and I don't see a thing or a cord, I know that I'm missing a component. And
so you carry an actual power cord or chargeable power cord, and then you have like your Apple Watch, your phone, your laptop, all that all plugged in.
All in the exact same spot every time. And I don't change that, again, just because then I don't have to think about it anytime that I show up to a hotel. It's kind of interesting how that all works.
But so is driving the same thing? Because I know when you're driving from like Arizona to Albuquerque or whatever, New Mexico, do you kind of do the same process? You just throw it in the back of your vehicle? And
the biggest difference when I drive would probably be the food component. Meaning, like I actually pack meals that will sustain me on depending on how many days I'm on the road.
Right.
So I pack a little chest of food, based on a calorie intake to make sure that kind of stays in shape. Just because typically speaking, when I drive, it's harder to work out or get a workout in on the road. Just because you're usually on the road for 10 to 12 hours on top of working 4 to 6 hours at a time, depending on your destination. But ultimately, even when I drive, I keep like my backpack in the exact same spot in my car, and I keep any supplies that I have for that particular trip, whether it's samples or whatever I'm bringing with me. I have them organized in the exact same manner to where if I take it into a business or I go and do a presentation, I know that when I'm looking at it, I can kind of have an idea, just visually speaking, of what I have or what I don't have in that particular case.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't recognize, but your brain actually likes that. Right. It's like if you don't create a checklist, if you don't have a checklist and you go to Smith's or Walmart or wherever, you'll forget something.
Right.
So you're eliminating that.
Yeah, I think there's actually some really cool stuff out there about mental fatigue. And the least amount of decisions that you have to make on a daily basis that you could just make habitual or just a part of what you do.
Right.
Your mental capacity isn't worn down based on those decisions. So there's a lot of really cool, things out there as it relates to mental fatigue and just trying to eliminate that piece because, going back to it, if I'm on the road for 3 weeks and some months, I'm on the road, 21, 22, 23 days in a month, you have to be on your game at all times because, there's not a lot of break in between, to recover. Right? If you're going from
everybody gets so tired when they travel too. So.
Sure. Yeah. The jet lag or just the time between it. Like, for example, on this trip, I'm just getting back from Colorado. I just was there for 5 or 6 days, and I'm going to be here for 5 or 6 days. And right when I get back, I'm going to head to Vegas for 5 or 6 days. So, I mean, you have all these continuous, traveling cycles, and you got to make sure that your energy is sustained throughout that process.
And so like when you're traveling, so when you get home, do you just like decompress and don't do anything? I know you like golfing and stuff, but do you take like a day or two off in between, or?
I generally, for the most part, the marketing and the training side that I do, I like to provide support 24/7. So I'm like your 24-hour support call.
Right.
So ultimately, I'll always take those calls regardless. From the best mentors that I've learned in what I do, and from the folks that I used to do business with on the other side, I had learned that the people that I had valued the most were the ones that would answer the phone at any time of day, whether it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Christmas Eve, it didn't matter. Some of those folks would always answer my call if I had a question, because it's not like when I was on the other side of the business, if I had a question, I wasn't calling to see how their health was and check in with them and their family. I probably had something going on that was live to me at the time. And those folks that were really good at it, they just answered their phone. So, I don't really take days off from that perspective just because I'm always there for support, but I might not, grind out over looking at reports or whatever the case may be. I might, take a day or so to do all that unless it was something urgent and important.
Yeah. Cause I know, from your Instagram, I know you do a lot of golfing and then you also like work out and stuff like that. Are you fatigued? Can you tell when you're on the road, like those 6 days, 4 to 6 days, 4 to 6 days, 4 to 6 days? Can you tell with your workout routines and stuff, or?
Yeah, that piece of it, that's a good question. That piece of it is 100% correct. I can tell you, definitively speaking, right when I get back, my workouts are probably the worst for those few days, just because, the energy level is a little bit lower.
Right.
It's harder to, I like to cycle indoor, and actually I like to road cycle too. That's really good to kind of clear your mind, if you will, but I can't ride nearly as long, regardless if my cardio feels good, just my body just won't allow, that perspective. Even if I push through it, I've been an athlete my entire life.
Right.
But I can just tell when I just need to just stop and relax a little bit. I would say more physically speaking, I get drained than I do mentally speaking.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's the physical wear and tear of the travel.
Yeah. And I think part of that, to be honest with you, is going back to the start of the conversation, is that decision-making process. I try not to, it's always funny to me, like, if I go to have lunch on my own, for example. I'm a huge fan of just when the waiter or waitress shows up, just asking what they would eat.
Right.
And then them saying, well, I would eat this. I'm like, great, just go ahead and bring that. Makes it super easy on me. And then I can go back to focusing on what I'm doing, regardless if I like it or not. A lot of times I'm not there to eat, for taste. I'm there to eat for, just to get the nutrition piece. But if I can eliminate those decisions throughout a day, I will, just because then.
So that's what you're saying. The physical part you can't eliminate, but but the mental, that's where you can still have that mental capacity to be able to answer the phone calls and.
Right. Yeah. I mean, physically speaking, it's going to take a toll no matter what. And obviously you have to do some things that, more in the self-care piece of it to kind of get you to where, you kind of recharge those batteries. Cause no matter how long your charge on your battery is, eventually you're going to have to recharge it no matter what.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I like that. I know that's going to be a help to people to start, maybe they can, I know for me when I travel, I haven't got to that point, but I'm going to try that. Like when I can sit there and, put everything and keep everything the same. So do you have like your, like your little shave bag or whatever? So you keep that all stocked at home and it's the same, you keep it probably in the same place, in the closet or whatever.
So I kind of take it a step further. So I keep whatever stays there. But whatever I travel with, I actually have a bin backed up with even my travel stuff. So when I go through and run through my little inventory in my travel bag for my toiletries, for example.
Oh, you have a bin of the stuff.
I have another bin of the travel supplies. So just imagine you go through your local grocery store and you see all those little bins with like travel supplies.
Yeah.
I pretty much have all those just chilling. And anytime I feel like I'm getting somewhat low, I just restock again, because then anytime I start running low, I just throw a couple in my bag.
See, that's a great idea. You could buy those little plastic, with 6 drawers or something like that, and put those somewhere and then have them, in a little closet or something.
Yeah, I have 4 bins that have the majority of the stuff that I use on a regular basis.
And you just buy the same stuff over and over again?
I would say the only thing, which is, I guess I shouldn't say this on your podcast, but the only thing that doesn't travel with me from home to on the road would be which I can kind of keep in my possession wherever, is my cologne.
Right.
Just because I don't want to buy multiple bottles of cologne.
That's
just me. But
so you take the cologne from
my travel bag and put it back at home.
And put it back at home. Yeah, vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny because on the sell side of things, remember back in the old days, it would be, I think you're younger than I am, but it was always like what cologne you had on and how you always smelled like, you would get near salespeople and they would smell like cigarettes and cologne.
Right. And some type of cheap gum or something.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Right, that's funny.
Yeah, it was always that way.
Right.
One of the things that we were talking about before, Aaron, I kind of want to get into this because I think it will be interesting for everyone, because we'll get in, I think it'll tie into sales and all that. But this is going to pertain to everyone. So whether you're a manager, whether you're a CEO, a CFO, it doesn't matter. Maybe you're a scientist at the labs or something. I had somebody tell me that the other day that they listened to this. There's something that I think is going to be kind of controversial, and I love it because that's what I like on my podcast that you were talking about, and you've been kind of said you've been brewing on it.
Yeah.
And I know when it's especially dealing with millennials and employees, but this is something, and it's the hashtag self-love, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of to circle back around when I kind of brought that up to you earlier, I wouldn't say a problem, I just would say more of a qualm, right? So from a psychological perspective, if you look at most, pyramids of needs and how things kind of work out, self-love is like on the bottom or in the middle of, depending on who you're looking at, right? Maslow or whatever the case may be. I'm not a psychologist, but it's rare that it's ever at the top. But right now, what's kind of happening in our society is we're taking a look at self-love as being the end-all, save-all.
Right.
Which I think what people, and as I had asked you earlier, which I'd love to ask any viewers, when did the coin flip from having a healthy ego to self-love? So for example, I feel like, ego is being tied into being a narcissist,
right? Or
being overconfident or cocky or whatever terminology you want to use with that, when self-love is meaning like accepting who you are to grow as a human being. My challenge to this and my biggest issue with this is that hypothetically speaking, if you want to maximize oneself, you want to get to your full potential, if you're not good at loving yourself, right? If you're not good in that vein already, like what are you going to do to improve? So as that kind of relates to sales, as you and I were talking about, is I really feel like, from my perspective that, and I'm not suggesting self-love doesn't mean that you don't care about yourself and you're not, understanding that you have a place and that you are a person that should connect to other human beings. That's not what we're referring to.
Right.
What I'm talking about is that, when you see this hashtag self-love, people are assuming that if I love myself, great things happen. But the challenge to that is there's not really anything tangible to that. Meaning your ego is in place for a reason. Like all of us have an ego. We all have an id. We all have a self-identity. And how you promote that and how you grow that is really the key. It's not through self-love. It's more through building confidence, right?
Right.
So, and how you build confidence, or in the business world, how you build that, snowball effect of results, if you will, is not through loving yourself by any means. It's through habitual actions that get you to an end result that, definitively speaking, will get you to where you want to go.
Right.
It doesn't matter, how we think about that, because our brains, going back to ego, your brain is designed to fight or flight. We're wired that way.
Right.
We're not programmed to take a step back and be like, you know what, I didn't make that sale. I'm going to love myself and get myself on the board and try that again. We're not programmed that way.
Right.
If anything, what happens is our brains are actually more lenient or more leaning towards the pessimistic side, to where I didn't make that sale. I'm a terrible salesperson. What am I going to do? I'm going to spiral. But then I remembered I'd read this self-love thing. So no, I'm actually not that bad of a salesperson. But really that's not a healthy ego. Really, what you're actually fighting in that particular case isn't self-love. You're actually just fighting your personal ego and how you approach the next situation. How do you problem solve through it? Self-love doesn't fix problems, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you can sit there and look and I want, if you don't mind sharing the story with the personal story that you had, but when you're faced with the moment where you have to make a decision and you have to decide, where am I going to go with this? Sitting there and just closing your eyes and saying, I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. That's not going to help you get to that decision that you need to make. That's going to help you and others. That's the other part too. Having confidence is not a bad thing.
Yeah. And actually, so the story that you're referring to is I'd gone to Vegas a few years ago. I'm not going to mention the name of the hotel, originally speaking, but it was during the summer. I had a 7-day reservation. I was there for work. It wasn't there for fun. So I show up 11 o'clock at night after 12 hours worth of travel. I mean, I was pretty tired physically and mentally speaking. By this point, it's 11 o'clock at night, whatever time I got to the front desk. And at that time, they informed me that my room wasn't available because they didn't have any AC, and they weren't going to be, nobody was going to be staying on these floors that didn't have AC. However, they had a partner property that they had been able to transfer everybody over to. So after about an hour and a half worth of a shuttle, after staying in line for 30 minutes, I get to the front desk of the new location just to be informed that at this time they didn't have nothing was transferred, nothing was communicated, nothing was done. So now it's like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm standing there in Las Vegas, all my luggage, everything hanging out. So if I were to take a look at that self-love piece, it's like, well, I love myself so much. Like, what am I going to do? I've seen scenarios like this, or even not even to that extreme, where people just break down,
right?
Which is okay.
Or flip out,
or they, they'll yell at the people at the desk and want to talk to a manager. I mean, I get all that, but I maybe call it whatever you want to call it. But my ego, my self-esteem kicked in and said, you know what, you're smart enough to figure this out. At this point, we're not going to battle this at 2 o'clock in the morning. What we have to do is we have to come up with a solution. We have to do it now. When I say we, I'm referring to myself. It's kind of good at third person thing, right? But so ultimately, I flipped through my Rolodex. I found a really good friend that was able to take me in. I mean, I never relied on that, but obviously I had to tap in my network because I'm a smart enough person. Show up there, stay there for a couple of days until I was able to resolve it. But there's no amount of, to me, I knew I had enough confidence in myself to resolve it. Ultimately, those hotels took care of me in the long run. I knew it was going to work out on that end of it regardless. There's nothing that was going to happen at that moment regardless of how hard you push. And I feel like sometimes, that self-love piece is that I love myself so much that somebody has to do something for me. Well, ultimately, that's not the world that we live in anymore. Right. Like, it's like you have to understand that, like, if you get to a certain point, like, that's, what are you going to do now?
Well, it's I was like, mommy and daddy always take care of me, or, even though I did shitty at this basketball game, I still got a trophy.
Right.
It's that you owe me mentality.
Right. And that's big right now. This is not a generational thing. This is our society thing where we hear the word entitled on a regular basis.
Right.
I will literally tie entitled to self-love to be one and one. I do not tie ego and entitled to be one and one. They're not equals. Meaning, your ego is designed to help protect you from the world that we live in, to allow yourself to be confident, to grow that piece of your brain, just like a muscle. I mean, you'll hear that everywhere. But what's interesting about it is even some of the folks in like the self-help world, like your, Tony Robbins, I don't know if I can name drop that or not. He never says that he's a self-help guy. He just mentions that he more or less helps people align the tools they already have to maximize who they are as a person.
Yeah, he helps them realize the tools that are in them.
Correct. And there's nothing there that says self-love. It's like, if I walked outside right now and somebody said, "Oh, your hair's terrible. Like, why do you have such long hair?" It's like, well, because I want it. Like that's not self-love, I guess. To me, it has nothing to do with that, because ultimately the definition of self-love to me doesn't make any sense, right? Meaning that's what your ego is in place to protect yourself.
Right.
Your ego is in place.
Well, why has ego turned to be so bad now?
Well, I think going back to, that original part, I think a lot of folks look at it as being cocky, a narcissist, meaning that so ego is not meant to inflict harm onto other people.
Right.
We don't have egos to inflict harm. That's human nature. Unfortunately, that's a part of the human condition. If somebody has malintent, you're not going to stop that, whether it be mentally speaking, verbally speaking. And I would never condone that by any means. However, I feel like a lot of times if you were to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, I have a really healthy ego," their initial response would be, "Well, you must be overconfident. Like, what's your deal?" Right.
Right.
Versus if I walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, like I have a lot of self-love," they're like, "Oh, that's so cool. Like you're woke." Like,
I've talked about this multiple times on the podcast, so this is great. Yeah, this is like perfect conversation.
So even if I were to buy in the fact that you're woke, meaning you're aware, you're self-aware,
right?
To me, then ego is the action behind the self-awareness that gets you to a better place as a human being. Self-love keeps you there, saying, "Well, I know all about me and my feelings." Great. Now, what are you going to do with that information?
Right.
Well, I'm just going to avoid all the bad things. How is that possible? So if you drive a car, if your philosophy is you're going to avoid all the bad things, you're on I-25 out here in Albuquerque, you're going to avoid all the bad things. How do you control a traffic jam and people driving out of control? How do you control that?
Right.
Like that's not in your control. So self-love says that I know who I am, but I'm going to stay here because I identify my feelings and I understand how I feel about myself, but there's no action behind that. Like,
right.
What does that mean? Like you wake up and say 5 things in the mirror that is helpful, which I don't disagree with some of those things, whatever you feel like you have to do to help build that confidence. But that ultimately then goes back to what I just said. That's your ego kicking in, saying, I'm actually growing that muscle as an ego to where if I get that phone call. And if anything, what we need to do is identify that we have healthy egos, especially as salespeople, and we accept the fact we're going to get told no. Like we have to accept that in advance. Like somebody's going to tell me no, I'm going to be around bad things in my life. Those things I'm going to get left high and dry at 2:00 in the morning in Las Vegas, standing there with luggage. I'm going to get left high and dry. If you travel enough, those things are going to happen.
Right.
If you drive a car, you're going to get a flat tire. Matter of fact, I used to have this philosophy, and I don't know if we talked about this last time, but one of the things I used to talk about with like your mentality behind this is that if you don't want to deal with a flat tire, right? Because some people, you get a flat tire, that'll mess up their whole day. Sometimes their whole week.
Right.
That'll mess up their coworkers' day and week just because you'll hear about that for like the next 2 weeks.
Right.
But if you don't want a flat tire, then don't buy the car, right? Then don't buy a car. But if you don't buy a car, then you use, say, public transportation. If the public transportation is late and that makes you late for work and you're mad about that, then don't do that. Then
don't have a job. Yeah.
Then ride a bike. Then if you don't want to deal with that, then walk. If you don't want to deal, then ultimately you're not dealing with anything, right? So you're actually not developing that relationship, if you will, with yourself, i.e. self-love, to be healthier, to have a healthier ego.
Well, I think that's the problem, what we're facing right now, because people are saying, I don't want any discomfort at all.
Right.
I mean, that's what our society is built on with consumerism, materialism, and all that. But it's to the point now where with social media, we can use it to say, I identify with this group, and anybody that does not identify with this,
right,
at the point of, persecuting them or, telling, you have people screaming, you're wrong.
Right.
I saw the other day, it was really interesting. There was this college kid and just screaming, and I'm not left or right or whatever. This isn't a political thing, but there was these Trump supporters that were there at a college, and then this kid was sitting there screaming bloody murder, that they were fascist Nazis.
Right.
They should all be killed.
Right.
This kid that's screaming bloody murder in their faces and looking at them, whether you agree or disagree with the political side of things, that right there shows you that person has probably been babied all their life.
Right.
I mean, we see this on the sales training side of things. Has probably been babied all their life, has had everything given to them.
Right.
And they're at this point now, they can't handle struggle.
Right.
They can't handle when there's something that is in front of them that's controversial. Like you said, they can't handle a no.
Right. You know, and that, you know, ultimately speaking, I guess, like, you know, to me, you know, if using sales as the analogy, if, you know, in a way past life of mine, I was around one of the best sales professionals I had ever met in my life. And he used to always say, when we'd go out to do our thing, I got to go out and get some no's in my face.
Yes.
Like he would get excited about he's like, I just want to go out and get some no's.
Right.
Because he knew the whole thing about, for every no, you're just closer to getting to a yes. Right.
Yes.
So I get that piece of it. And that's where I guess like the self-love thing has been kind of chewing at me a little bit, is because I find it interesting, you know, as it relates to social media and in our business world, because if you're an influencer, if you're a sales professional, or if you're a leader, you don't get to that point.
Right.
Unless you ultimately have a healthy ego, meaning you're confident enough in your ability to share your message. You might not be doing it because that's your end result. That's not your goal. Maybe some influencers and maybe some leaders didn't set out to be like, it's not like you woke up, you know, at age 12 and wrote a dissertation about being a leader your entire life and taking a group or an organization to the highest level. But what happens is just over time, as you build that muscle up and you deal with all the adversity that comes along the way, your ego is what kicks into gear. Your ego is what helps you get through those tougher times, not self-love. It's not like, hey, you know what? I just lost a multi-million-dollar deal. I'm going to go back and love myself because I'm still a really good person. It's like, no, dude, what's going to get you through is your ego, right?
But I think it's also sitting there and having that self-reflection and turning around and saying, you know, I didn't do good enough. That if I would have sat there, where was in my presentation? Where was there holes in it? Why were they tuning out after 3 minutes? You know, and that's where I'm going to blame you for it, because I'm loving myself. I'm going to blame you for it instead of taking personal responsibility.
So maybe let me make that. That's a good point. That maybe I want to make sure that I hit home here, is that I'm a huge fan of self-love from the perspective of what the core belief is that I'm okay with myself and I'm good at what I do and I'm all right and I'm loved and I'm a great person. But I'm also a big fan of self-awareness, right?
Right.
Meaning I know what part I played in this and I know what I need to do in the future.
Yes.
I'm going to analyze it and I'm going to make sure that I do better in the future. And self-care. I'm not delineating between those three or anything in that vein.
You're talking about the viewpoint of this bastardization of self-love.
Correct. I'm saying anything that has to do with self, whether it's self-love, but you have to have that all in the same level of the process. I'm saying self-love is not the end-all, save-all. I would put self-love at the same level as self-awareness, self-care, and anything else that you're doing to constantly improve oneself to ensure that you're moving to the next level, meaning you're feeding your ego. Ego is the action behind all of those things.
Right.
Ego is your self-identity, or the id is your self-identity to get you to where you want to go. And that's the healthy mindset, right? It's like, if I choose to go out and compete in your terms, and if I go out and compete in a basketball game and I lose, I don't expect to be congratulated for losing. Like that's not an expectation, because honestly speaking, one, I'm not going to lose. That's just my philosophy. I'm not going to lose. Two, if I did for whatever reason on the off chance, I'm not going to be okay with it, because like you were mentioning, like I'm going to go back and analyze it and make sure that in the future, when engaged in that competition again, like I'll ensure that I take the right measures, because I'm competitive with myself enough to where I want to be the best I can possibly be to get to the next level. But again, I don't think that that's self-love. That's actually exact opposite of self-love, meaning like what no one talks about in self-love, that you should be competitive with yourself to get better. They just say that's what be happy with who you are, and accept, that there's things that are out of your control, which you should. But ultimately speaking, we should definitely put ourselves in more adverse situations than possible. Actually, I put a little post out on, I think it was Facebook. I'm rarely on there. But I put a little deal, which actually was kind of interesting, kind of entertaining to me. I put on there that I choose to make things harder so that it's easier in the future type deal.
Right.
And somebody's like, what does this even mean? You want to make things harder to make it easier? I'm like, absolutely. I want it to be as difficult as possible, because then in the future, I'm guaranteeing I'm going to run into the same thing again somewhere, because unless I break the chain of events on my side of it, which is still a hard thing to do.
Right.
Habits are hard to break regardless of who you are. So going to the gym, for example, I'm going to make it as hard as possible. Every day I want to be sore. If I'm not sore, you're probably not, you're not growing as a human being. That's just an example. I'm not going to go to the gym just to say I went to the gym, right? I'm not going to go do a workout just to say, hey guys, I worked out. Great.
Right.
I love myself. Let me move forward. I'm going to go to the gym to make it as hard as challenging as possible, to ensure that I'm growing as a human being. I mean, that's my biggest qualm with self-love is I feel like it's an acceptance of, and I think you said it earlier, acceptance or an excuse to be average.
Yes.
It's okay to love yourself with who you are currently speaking. Well, I don't know. Is it?
Right.
I mean, the world's evolving around you. Like, interest rates are going to go up 3% every year. Is it really okay to be who you are? Like, I know I'm not saying that the monetary thing is that, but the very funny thing I learned from one of the guys I worked with a long time ago. He said, I don't want to be the hardest worker. I just want to be the hardest worker in the room.
Mm.
So he would look in a room, doesn't matter what room he was sitting in, and he would evaluate himself against everybody sitting in that room. Am I the hardest worker in this room? That's what he'd ask himself every time he showed up to a conference, to a call, or whatever. And even if it was him to a consumer client or guest, he would ask himself, am I outworking this person? That has nothing to do with self-love.
Right.
I guess maybe, unless I'm understanding self-love to be different.
Yeah, I think I think I think it's the ability to be able to look at yourself and say, and to have honesty instead of looking at like the self-love culture now that you're seeing is they're being dishonest with themselves, because in the end you have to, if you're saying a no really wasn't a no, and then you're turning around and shifting the blame to something else, then you're just playing. It's just the self-love becomes a victim mindset. Right. It's like Howard Schultz with Starbucks. I forgot, wasn't it? It was like 130 times banks told him no.
Right.
They're like, you're freaking crazy. You're going to charge $5 for coffee.
Right.
I mean, you heard that story. Right. He literally was told no by banks like 130 times.
Right.
If he did not have an ego. Right. If he would have said, I'm just going to keep making coffee and I'm just going to love myself. And, obviously it must not meant to be. Right. I went to 20 banks.
Right. Yeah, it's actually funny you say that because, I know that there's a lot of stories out there. I actually used to use this in sales training, but Dr. Seuss was the same thing. He went to 28 different editors before he got to his yes. His 29th was his yes. And
that's all through life.
And that was back in the day when you actually had to knock on a door.
Yes.
And you had to walk in, you had to open the door, you had to sit at the desk, you had to face-to-face somebody tell you that your work is just terrible. That's a totally different level. Now emails, credit apps, whatever you do, as far as, it's all digital. But that was back in the day when you had to go with your little suitcase full of books that you wrote, and you had to sit there with somebody and then tell you that your work was terrible. And then he went on to sell, it's like 500 million copies.
As far as kids' books, he's probably number one.
Yeah, it's crazy numbers. But that's persistence in that. And maybe, again, I would hate to say that, everybody that believes in self-love, turns that into that piece. I wouldn't go necessarily down that road. I would just say, at least if you're going to say that piece of it, from a logical standpoint, define what self-love looks like.
Right.
And if it's tied around a result, that doesn't make any sense. What I mean by that is this: you can't possibly love yourself if you only celebrate your wins.
Right.
So if my definition of self-love is I love myself every time I make a sale, then that means every time you don't make a sale, you don't.
And that's what, 80% of the time?
Well, yeah, it's like, yeah. In my profession, it's like 10 or 15.
Right.
You're making a sale 15% of the time. So
yeah, exactly.
That means 15% of my day I love myself, and the other 85%, it's like I don't love myself. See, and that's where I get so confused about that, because I haven't read a definition that resonates to me as it results to getting a result.
Right.
Like so now that you have that information about whatever your definition, if your definition is I love myself because I accept who I am and I'm okay with who I am as a human being, great. Now what are you going to do with that information? That's what I want to know. What's the follow-up to self-love? And that's why I think my biggest qualm to it is that if you're just running around saying self-love and everyone should just accept it and, and all these other things that are happening in our today's society, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And actually what happens is, with our, everyone's super, super gritty with their keyboard and, and their laptops and their phones, as far as sending out messages. And I think the current term is shade or whatever, right?
Right.
But ultimately speaking, none of that really matters in the long run if you have a healthy ego. I mean, that's what gets you to where you want to go.
Yeah, you have to have, you have to have ego or you would die. We wouldn't have mankind if we didn't have ego.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's to sit there and say you have no ego, that is, I don't know if you've ever, the Stoic philosopher that's out now, Ryan Holiday, I don't know if you ever heard of him. He wrote a book and it's kind of play on words. It's called Ego is the Enemy. But in actuality, what the book was about is taking people and understanding, that you need ego, but what you're thinking ego is, and I think it's the same thing, the definition of what self-love is, because I mean, we're all condoning to have a healthy love of yourself.
Right.
But you can't what's being used now, and what I'm seeing it's kind of more of an excuse for you to play the victim.
Right.
And in any type of business world, you can't be a victim. You won't be successful.
No, and actually, I'm a huge fan of Eckhart Tolle.
Yes.
And he wrote he's a really good book called New Earth. And he talks about, if we didn't have ego, like a lot of the problems in the world would be solved, which I don't disagree with. Look, here's the thing. Like if nobody on the planet, 7 billion people had it, it wouldn't matter. Right. Meaning if no one had an ego, that confidence, that piece of it, and everyone had that piece of it. But ultimately speaking, it's built into us. It's hardwired. We're hardwired.
But I mean, everything that we're attracted to has a form of ego in it, whether it's a rock star, we like that whole, when we look at Kanye, he's crazy, but he has a huge ego and we're entertained by that.
Correct.
Music is put out with every bit of everything that we do. Why would I wear Adidas shoes over Jordans?
Right.
That's an ego that's making me make that choice.
Correct.
I'm when I wear a suit, I'm feeling that suit. That's my ego saying, damn, Jason, you look good, or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Or whether it's a dress or whatever. I mean, I don't wear those very much, but.
And if you did, it's no worries on that. Everything you just said there is 100%. And that's where I feel like, from this side of it that, I really think that, we have to be a little bit conscious and careful of this, right? Because ultimately speaking, one of the things that we talked about on the last podcast, as a leader, an influencer, or whatever the case may be, you can gas people up for a short amount of time. But once that tank runs out, then what?
Yes.
So if I run around, I can go out here in Albuquerque, I'll meet 1,000 people and I'll get them feeling like they're on cloud 9. Just telling them, all about self-love and coaching them up and helping them understand that. But then once I unplug, then what? Like, what have I actually done for those folks, right? It's kind of that whole philosophy.
There's no empowerment to them.
Correct. Because it's not sustainable.
That's why people chase conferences and chase, and they're reading self-help books and going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yeah, whatever the new philosophy is.
And then taking something external when actually internally it's in you. All the tools that, like you said with Tony Robbins, all the tools are inside of you to empower you.
Yeah. And actually more of his analogy, that he uses, which is great, is that if you kind of think about a toolbox, right? Let's say I'm working on a project and my project requires to go and grab a hammer.
Right.
But I walk over to the toolbox. Now I'm not very familiar with tools in general, just so we all know, to be 100% forthright. But let's say I need a tool like a hammer because I'm going to hammer a nail.
Right.
But I walk over to my toolbox, but I pull out a tape measure.
Right.
How long is it going to take me to hammer a nail with a tape measure or to chop down a tree with a hammer instead of a saw? Like, meaning the way that he talks about it is that we'll have the tools. It's just how they're organized to tap into that toolbox inside of you to maximize who you are. And that's an ego thing. That's not a self-love thing.
Right.
Self-love would be recognizing that you have these tools, but your ego is the one that puts it into action. That's the piece that says, you know what? I'm in a situation or I feel a certain way, but I know I have the tools to get through this regardless of the scenario. And that's including on the high side of things too, right? Because, you hear a lot about athletes when they're performing at the highest level, it's kind of like they're not conscious at the time, right?
Yes.
It's like, it's kind of, they're experiencing these moments where they're there full body and mind.
Right.
But it's like things are moving in slow motion. That was always the analogy that I used to use, back when I used to play sports at a high level, was I remember things would always just slow down. Right. Because you're just using the tools that you already had. It's not a self-love thing. But
it took 80% of the time was all the grinding and the running stuff. And the horrific stuff to get to that point.
Right. And I mean, you could say like self-love, like, hey, I love to do these up downs and I'm playing football and I love to go out and like almost pass out from running wind sprints and, with a million degrees weather and all these pads and everything else. There's no self-love in that situation. No. It's just all action, right? You're just doing it. And it's the same thing in our business world, right? When you're going through your initial training perspective, you're not sitting there like, I'm going to learn this because I'm a smart person. It's like, no, you got to focus on what you're doing,
right?
And get through the information, ask intelligent questions, and be engaged. That's your ego kicking in, because how you approach that training is the same way you approach anything else. You probably did it at a previous place of employment, and your leader probably had done it at a previous place of employment. Meaning that's just who we are as human beings to get us to that level, right? And that's probably where I see the most opportunity is how we're helping others. Influence wise, whether it's in business or whatever the case may be, to help them really truly reach, their full potential.